Hello and welcome back to another episode of Exvangelical Reacts. I'm your host, Chris Keaton, and I used to be an evangelical Christian, and now I'm not. If I look sick, it's because I am, and I never learned how to apply makeup because patriarchy. So today's video is a girl-defined video. I know I'm hopping on the bandwagon a little bit here and also a little behind. It's called An Honest Conversation About Saving Sex for Marriage. I thought this would be a good video to touch on because I grew up in purity culture where I believed that saving sex for marriage was God's will and also the only way to have sex and still be a holy person. And I also thought it would be good because it's not just Bethany and Kristen, the two original and main girl-defined people, it is also their husbands. So I thought it might be interesting to hear their take on saving sex for marriage.
Thanks so much for tuning in today. It's Bethany, Kristen, Zach, and Dave. We are so excited to have our husbands on here to talk about honest conversations about saving sex for marriage.
I feel like an honest conversation would include talking about how everyone wants to have sex and how most people will have sex before they're married, and how to prevent the spread of STDs, or how to properly communicate with your partner when you are ready to have sex or if you're not ready to have sex. Her saying we're going to have an honest conversation about saving sex for marriage is kind of an oxymoron because the whole idea about saving sex for marriage has caused people to not be honest in their conversations about having sex because of abstinence culture, which comes from purity culture, which comes from Christianity. So already an honest conversation is sort of a weird title for me.
The reason we thought it would be really cool to make this video is because so many of you have actually asked us, like emailed us, DM'd us and said, what? You chose to save sex for marriage? Like all of you? Why did you choose to do that? Was it worth it? Like, that's really strange. Yeah. Weird. And so if you're someone who has had sex before marriage and you're like, man, I regret that. I really do want to honor God in this area in my life, then we want you to know that God's forgiveness is extended to all of us, that He offers grace and forgiveness, and that any day for any of us, as we've made choices in the past, we can choose today to draw a line in the sand and say, God, would you help me from this point forward to walk faithfully for you?
Okay. Starting out right with shame. They probably think they're offering some kind of gracious wisdom here and helping people out, but don't be fooled. For anyone on the fence about whether or not them having sex was okay, this is a great way to subtly remind them that they fucked up and to get back in line.
God loves you so much, He'll forget about how mad He is at you.
So we just want to encourage you that God is in the business of restoration and forgiveness, and that our future can look different than our past.
It seems more like God is in the business of being up in people's business, if you know what I mean. Restoration and forgiveness regarding made-up rules historically touted by religious figures in male-centric societies who are so afraid of their inner femininity that they go so far as to criticize, control, shame, and even torture those who don't fit the mold of what they think it is to be a whole and worthwhile person, i.e. a cis, straight, white male. So basically they took the first couple minutes to set up this format. They are answering people's questions about why they saved sex for marriage, and then he also has a Bible verse to explain why it's a sin to have sex before marriage, because there's some verse that says that God doesn't like it. Now we're going to get into their personal experience with it.
The reason we did that was because God has called us to something greater. So that's the main why. That's the main why. But
I
as
like
far
that.
as but intellectually, why did I do that? Well,
Yes, exactly. Bring it down, bring it down.
So, I mean, because that was the idea around the community that we were in, was like, hey, don't do that. That was one of the reasons. Right. Good positive encouragement from those around me.
This is an important point, and kudos to him for taking the first step in realizing this. He says he did this and believes in it because the community around him believed it and supported him in continuing their beliefs. He's basically like,
everyone was doing it, so I guess I should probably do this as well.
When you're surrounded by certain behaviors and beliefs, it's extremely difficult to move outside of those boundaries without upsetting people you care about or becoming an outcast. And when you're a kid, everyone around you, including your parents and other adults that you look up to, are like, this is the way, my child. So your basic instinct is to go,
this is the way. I believe you and I trust you and you've taken care of me, so I'll do as you say because you seem to have things figured out.
And not until 20 years later do we realize they didn't have shit figured out and they were just making it up based on what other people people told them to do. But this is only half of his explanation, so let's hear him out.
But I think just intellectually, like, I knew just sleeping around with other girls is not going to be that helpful for me.
He's like,
Right? Like, that's icky, right? We don't like that, right? No. Yeah, we don't like that.
he looks over to the other guy to get that, like, confirmation, and his butt over there is just, like, straight up robotic, deadpan.
Right.
Yes, you are correct.
Totally.
Just thinking about the future, I want to have one person that I'm committed to,
Yeah.
and knowing one person is different than knowing 10 people.
Yeah.
Quick mess.
It's got to be better.
Yeah.
Like, that just intellectually makes sense.
Bro, he's really struggling here. He's just, like, panicked, like, constantly looking over to his friend, just like,
It makes sense, right? This is intellectual. All of this makes sense, right?
you know, if God's reason for sex is not procreation, then what is it? If it's intimacy, why wouldn't he just be like,
Just have an intimate relationship with me. It's what all the earth leaders tell all the gay people to do.
That's literally the argument that I've heard presented for anyone who isn't straight. The new and improved argument is,
It's not a sin for a man to be attracted to a man. It's only a sin if he acts on it. We're all tempted in different ways, but we have to resist temptation. You have the option to be in an intimate relationship with God to fulfill your needs.
but besides Mary, ain't nobody's needs getting met by God. And why the heck would God design sex in this way if he knew it was all gonna go to shit anyway? Couldn't he have just made us shed seeds like plants so we didn't have to worry about messing up this one specific rule that so many people weren't going to follow? It goes back to the point I made in my other video. Why would God want us to keep making more people to live for a little while and then go to hell? Because that seems to be what it's going to be for most people. Mormons are an example of a group of religious people who believe your soul is waiting to be born before you're born. Evangelical Christians and Christians in general, I don't think, talk about that. So it's not like we even need to bring as many souls in as possible to give them a chance to be able to go to heaven. So why wouldn't God just give a few generations the chance if he really wanted to pretend like anyone ever had free will, and then just call it quits? It seems pretty cruel to me to allow us to keep getting frisky if God is just going to take the byproduct of that friskiness and throw it in the trash can of eternal suffering.
There's a passage where it says, he that has sex outside of marriage is sinning against himself. Like, he's sinning against his own body. I believe, sex is a promise. The act of sex is your body making a promise.
Yeah.
And so it's schizophrenic to make a promise with your body without making a promise, a covenant with your mind and your heart. And that actually is disintegrated from what it means to flourish as a human being.
What a great way to scare people into listening to you.
You're sinning against yourself when you break the rules. You must really hate yourself and be schizophrenic because you didn't listen to this really old fucking book.
I've heard shit like this schizophrenia line so many times in sermons. Besides trying to be shocking, I don't get why pastors and Christians like to use terms like this. It really goes to show how much they think about the words they're saying before they actually fucking say them. I can't tell you how many times I was sitting in a pew in church and I was basically told that I was insane because a preacher decided to say,
The definition of insanity is trying something over and over again and expecting different results.
This was a huge tactic to try to convince people to live according to the Bible or to give their lives to God, or that they were just generally messing up in some way. And it's disrespectful to the reality of having mental illnesses. They're using half-baked terms to mislead people into believing they have struggles in their lives because they don't believe in this God or they're not saved. But here are a couple questions. How many fucking saved people stop having problems? None of them. How many people who claim to have an intimate relationship with God wake up every day and still have shit to deal with? All of them. Except now, since they believe they have the truth, their struggles are no longer a byproduct of not being saved. It's now a test of your faith to bring you through the fire to come out on the other side closer to God. I don't think most people realize when they move the goalpost like this. Because when you believe you have the right answer, you're no longer looking for an answer. You're just trying really hard to make everything fit into the scheme of the answer that you think is right, so that you can hold on to the security of being in the know and therefore being safe. Meanwhile, you're trying to convince everyone that you've found the right answer, even if they believe they have the right answer, with the same kind of conviction you have. And this is usually where people will say something like,
I don't care if someone else believes they have the right answer. They're wrong, and nothing you or them or anyone else could say could convince me otherwise.
So my question is, what does it say about the security and accuracy of your conclusion question if someone else could go through a similar process and come up with a different answer, but you still think yours is more valid. So the next point in this conversation is usually related to faith. Both of these cards are really great to pull because you can only go so far when you're talking about such subjective material. Nonetheless, it's often where the conversation leads. Christians have faith that their religion is true and that they have the truth. And yet, just like we talked about, someone else could have the same experiences in a different religious context and believe that they have the truth, but that doesn't mean anything to the Christian. They'll still be convinced that the Christian truth is the one truth. So my next question is, if someone could go through the same process and use their faith in the end to convince themselves of a truth that isn't the Christian truth, and you still think they're wrong, what does that say about the validity and soundness of using faith as a tool to prove anything? Let's continue.
You would think of sex as outside of marriage as more liberating and more free. Like that's just a typical cultural narrative. Like I need to be having sex. I need to be letting my body express itself in this way sexually, and in that way I will be liberated. I will be my truest self. I will be experiencing fullness of life.
Yeah, because there's this idea that to withhold anything is going to be damaging,
That's
right?
a false narrative.
Unhelpful.
That's not true. That's just not true.
Yeah.
And just because most people we know might believe it, or most people you know might believe it, doesn't make it true.
Oh boy, I love that he brought this up. The irony here is palpable, and it's just sipping right over their heads. He says, just because most people we know, or most people that you know, believe it, doesn't make it true. You're exactly right, Dave. Just because a bunch of people around you believe something doesn't necessarily make it true. So tell me, why do you believe what you believe, and how do you know it's true? This point is often when people's personal experience comes into play. They'll say they know it's true because of an experience they had with their God. When someone has a mystical or emotional experience, which is a common human experience, and they have it inside of a specific context, it's really hard to remove it from that context after the fact. So for example, if someone has an experience in a Christian church service where they're filled up with joy and happiness and hope, it's going to be really hard to not maybe think that that's coming from the Christian God. But the same would be true in any other religious environment. If you are surrounded by that religion and people who believe in that, and you have a similar experience of being filled up with joy, happiness, and hope, you're going to associate it with the context that you're in. So if everything and everyone around you is Christian, then it's likely that you're going to have this experience in a Christian context. And the same would also be true in a non-religious context. So does that make their experience less valid than yours? I expect if we asked the non-Christian who had the experience, they would say absolutely not.
The reality is freedom can only be experienced within proper constraints. That's what we believe. I've heard this great analogy, right? Fish is the most free when it's in water. The moment a fish, jumps out of the water onto the land, you could say, well, it's more free than it was in the water.
It's in the great big world.
It's in the world. It doesn't have the constraint of water, and it will die. Like that, and so God has put these boundaries in our lives and around us, and through His Word for our good.
So we're the fish in this analogy, and god damn it if Christians' examples of things don't always come back to dying.
Oh, you want to be free like the fish? Fine. Go ahead, get out of the water. See how much you like it, you stupid fish. Go have sex and die, you fish.
It's just like a subtle flex and threat the entire time.
I don't know what to tell you. I believe this is the way to be holy and the best way of doing it. So, I guess if you don't want to do it the best way, like I'm doing it, then you can, die.
Hey everyone, you may be wondering why I'm suddenly cutting in like this. And it's because as I was editing, I realized this video was going to be longer than I anticipated. So I'm cutting it into 2 parts, as you probably saw in the title. But because I didn't anticipate this, I don't have a good transition or a recording of me in the same setup saying, hey, tune in next time. So this is me saying, tune in next time, and hopefully you'll forgive the non sequitur. So, thank you for watching part 1 of this 2-part video. Please be sure to like and subscribe if you like this video, because it really helps me out and lets me know that you're liking what I'm doing. Down in the comments below, let me know what you think so far about what Girl Defined is saying, or about anything I'm saying, or about any of your thoughts on the matter. Thanks for watching all the way to the end, and keep an eye out for part 2 coming in the next couple of days. Catch you guys later.